Welcome back to Talking Story. My name is John Minton, and I am absolutely out of my head thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Fantasy himself, the purveyor of the best of fantasy, one of the pillars of the booktube community that looked up to for a good long time before I even started my own channel. And then to find out how hyper talented of a writer he is, Dr. Philip Chase. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, John, for inviting me here and for that extremely kind introduction. I'm actually really happy just to talk with people who have read the book, and I consider it a real privilege to be able to talk to you. So I'm very happy to be here.
Well, that makes me very happy because, like I say, I've been watching your videos for the longest time, and I think, it's almost like I think you and AP for me run almost a dead heat of the wise oracle on the hill of booktube for us sometimes. I tell you, I have not done like Malazan kind of scares me to death, and
Hmm.
I'll listen to some people, and it's like, man, I need a protractor. Like, what's it going to take for me to get into this series? And then I'll listen to you talk about it and talk about the themes and what it's really doing. And it's like I have to read that,
Yeah.
So I think you and AP run that dead heat for me of the wise man up there.
Well, that's funny because I feel like when we get together, we're like more or less like 12-year-old boys. So.
Well, that's beautiful because it keeps you young, man.
Yes, yes.
I have watched several interviews and I've watched several discussions that you've had on your channel about the trilogy, and I have only read book one. So I'm going to try and keep it to that. And I'm going to try and keep it as vague as possible because I really want to motivate everyone to give this a try that hasn't, and I don't want to spoil anything.
Okay.
So some of this I'm going to come at maybe trying to go a bit deeper, but it's things I've heard you cover, but I do want to go a little bit deeper. And from having an artist journey myself, I always like to start at this point. When did you know? When did it hit you? When did you have a calling to be a storyteller? And I know it involves Tolkien because again, I've heard some of the interviews. So,
Sure.
well,
Yeah, I was around 12 or so, 12 or 13 when I read Lord of the Rings for the first time. And when I got to the end of Return of the King, I experienced what I would now call catharsis. I had no idea the word existed when I was a kid, but I experienced a real sense of wonder and awe and just this melancholy and just this,
interesting.
yeah, incredible. Just I could not put words to it when I was that age, but boy, did I love what I was experiencing.
Was it because it was over the melancholy?
That's part of it. But
Yeah,
I had participated in a tremendous journey, and that
absolutely.
journey changed me. Even though I was only a vicarious participant, it changed me as it changed the characters. And I felt like I was seeing the world just a little more clearly, and I was seeing more of the beauty in the world. So the story really spoke to me even as a kid, and ever afterward, I thought to myself that I would love to be able to do something like that for people if I ever could. And so I embarked on my own journey of trying to become a writer, which for me, as a somewhat misinformed and idealistic kid, it involved eventually going to graduate school to study Old English and Old
You
Norse, and I
you
studied
you
Welsh and various.
you went the long way around the
I
barn,
went
my
the
friend.
scenic route. I went.
Yeah. That answer of yours, though, really speaks to me because when I read Lord of the Rings, and I was young as well,
Uh-huh.
I came to it after Narnia, and I read it young. And I think it's so interesting when we're young or young people have the ability to see the magic. And I feel like that book and fantasy in general for me, um, there's an inherent truth to it. The world we live in, I mean, to us, we are the heroes of our own story, and the world we live in is truly miraculous and magical. So when we're stepping into the shoes of our heroes and going on these journeys, there's more of an intrinsic truth, a life truth to it that you can see when you're young. Sometimes I think we lose that
Mm.
as we grow older. So I fully respect how that spoke to you at that point in time.
Yeah, yeah. I think that we become dulled to our sense of wonder sometimes as adults. And one of the things I love about the fantasy genre is that it continuously keeps me in touch with that, and
Yeah,
appreciate
absolutely.
that. Yeah,
Absolutely. I was talking to someone on a live stream, and it's like I love so much about this community because I feel so much of us spend so much time on the hero's journey that it gives us something to aspire to and be inspired by that we bring to our own lives. So the openness and kindness of this community, it shocked me at first, but then as I became more and more been around a little bit longer and met more people, it starts to make a certain kind of sense.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you. It's been a wonderful experience for me to have started a YouTube channel dedicated to exploring fantasy,
Yeah.
with the premise that there is much in fantasy that is worthy of critical exploration. And have to say, I did not know when I started that there was this community, and it was maybe it was the best thing about starting the channel was becoming part of this broader community of people who are seeking what I was seeking, which is to have some dialogue, to explore these stories together and enrich each other's experiences of them.
I completely feel that. I watching so much of it and it changing my life. And then, I want to add my voice to this. I want to be a part of this. It means so much to me.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just really amazing how, and my studies, I learned, drama is life lived at a heightened reality. So the genres we love, there's nothing more truer in the sense of the word to amp that reality up, to bring those intrinsic truths about life.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So one more thing about Tolkien, and I just I see if we can agree on that. Or when you read it as a boy, and I'm sure you've studied it, many times after that 12-year-old read, was it the hero's journey that caught you up and spoke to you more so, or was it that in Tolkien, it's literally every blade of grass and pebble on that path along that hero's journey has backstory and lore and weight and gravitas, and it is three-dimensional in every way. Every rock you walk by will have a language carved into it that has been, completely researched and sound. Was it that world building, or was it the characters in the hero's journey that spoke more so, or was it just the overall package that brought about that feeling of truth to you when you were a young boy and studying it after?
I think it was both of those things that you, I think, very eloquently expressed. There's the characters, particularly the hobbits, I feel are us in
Absolutely,
this
yes.
epic world.
Which is strange because there's humans there.
Yes, those humans are, for the most part, larger than life.
Absolutely,
They
yeah.
are straight out of myth and legend, and they're wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I love Aragorn and Legolas and Gandalf and all the others, but they are much more identifiable as archetypes, I would say. Tropes, if you will, which I do not view as a negative word at all. I view that as simply a tool which can be used well or not.
Yeah, so happy to hear that. I've been saying the same things. People will go, "Oh, I don't know, that book is kind of tropey," and it's like, you know what? I enjoy every bowl of Irish stew I've ever had, and it's the same meat, carrot, and potatoes in there,
Yes, right. Yeah.
it's still great, man.
Yep.
So those tropes still work. They still speak to me in some deeper level that makes me keep coming back.
Well, and there's a reason they exist, isn't there?
Yeah,
Because
and then we get to subvert them for effect as well.
right, right. They speak to some very deep psychological need, I think, that humanity has. So they exist, and they can be used well or not well, like any other tool. So I do think that I love all the bigger epic characters, the legendary characters, but the hobbits. I think the stroke of genius that Tolkien had was in Lord of the Rings, particularly combining the mythical vibe that he had established already in the Silmarillion and the stuff that he'd been working on since his youth, along with and when he wrote The Hobbit, he wrote it as initially really as a children's book, but
Mhm.
it's the combination of those two in Lord of the Rings that I especially love. It's having the humanity, the humble little people injected into this epic world, which I thought is just I found that extremely compelling, and identified with those characters.
And those humble people have to find their strength within
That's right.
to do what the moment of history is calling for them to do, which is I and the reason I wanted to spend a little bit more time on this and a little bit more time with Token is because I know this is your answer, and I know I've heard it before, but there's so much of this I see mirrored in such a wonderful way in your work, which I absolutely want to get to. But I do first, before I get into that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the self-publishing experience. Now, I know you were working on this for many, many years, and I think I understood you to say your agent finally said, the self-publishing is something we should explore.
Mhm.
And what has the experience been like? Has it been fulfilling? Has it been exciting to be a art director for the cover and in charge of every step, of the way? And congratulations on the broken binding news, negotiating these things, like has it been fulfilling, this journey of indie publishing?
Most definitely, yes. The If anyone had told me how wonderful self-publishing is, I might not have ever bothered trying the traditional route.
Really?
To tell you the truth, I mean, I did want to try that. That was my, without knowing much about self-publishing, and self-publishing is evolving rapidly as
Oh,
well.
it's so different now.
Yeah,
It's
it
so
is very
different now.
different than even 10 years ago.
Right.
With every passing year, it is more and more, I think, viable, not just viable, but attractive as an alternative to traditional publishing. And I'm not saying traditional publishing is dying or should be dead or anything like that, because it has its place.
Right.
But I think for those of us who are writing stories that might not necessarily be well received in traditional publishing, self publishing is a very viable route now. And particularly if you're willing to do the hard work, which
That
the traditional
exactly.
publishers would normally do. So you
Right.
need, I would say, if you can afford it, you should hire an editor, for example. And I'm very fortunate to have worked with AP Canavan as a.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. But I mean, it's interesting to me that we're starting to see kind of the hybrid author. Like some projects are
Uh,
indie published, some projects are trad published. I mean, this goes to show the validity of either path, right?
yes. Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I think we should be leaving behind the outdated notion that self-published equals inferior, because nowadays you can find people who take the effort to get the editorial help, to get, in fact, I would actually venture to say, and I'm sure there are a lot of people would agree with me, that by and large, and it's a generalization, but by and large, if you're looking at just things like cover art,
Mhm.
self-publishing is ahead of traditional publishing in
There's
that.
some beautiful covers coming out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's exciting. I think it's very exciting right now. The creative freedom that that self-publishing entails is absolutely wonderful. I have enjoyed being able to make my own editorial decisions with lots of input from people like AP. But I also feel like there are logistical freedoms that I have as a self-publishing author that I would never have in traditional. I would have no control whatsoever about when my book is released, how often I can release a book. I never could have done. I'm pretty sure what I did this year, which is to
Yeah.
release all three books in
3 books in a year.
year.
I can't imagine had been able to do that.
I doubt it very much that I would
Yeah.
be able to do that in traditional publishing. So there's just there are a lot of pluses to self-publishing. And I'm not even talking about the financial incentive, because as an author who's self-publishing, you see a much larger percentage of the profits than you do as a traditionally published author. Much larger percentage.
And as you should, because you're doing the
Yeah,
marketing and the you're putting the package, you're doing a lot more of the work.
you're
So
paying for the editor and the artist and the cover
right.
designer, and you're having to do all the marketing and that stuff that, at least in theory, the traditional publishers would have done. Although, frankly, I think traditionally published authors are basically hustling the same way as
I'm
self-published
starting to hear
authors
that. I'm starting to hear that more and more. It's
as
like
far as marketing goes.
they
Yeah,
have to be out marketing and selling themselves just like just like an indie author would.
pretty much. Yeah. So the traditional publishers, yes, they do the editorial help. They take care of the covers and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're talking about the marketing side of things, I don't think let's put it this way: the vast majority of traditionally
Right.
published authors are no better off than a self-published author, because the traditional publishers are basically going to back a couple of the winners, and they're going to let everything else basically die on the vine.
Hmm.
So, as an author, the chances are very high that you're going to have to get out there and hustle yourself if you want your books to sell. So,
Especially a debut author that may be doing something that is not marketable or can be seen by a publisher as being marketable right off the bat.
yeah,
And to me, it's there was such an exciting time when in indie filmmaking first started happening, and
uh-huh.
there were productions out there that you could, or off productions, live stage, things that you would not necessarily see commercially viable, but it was where the exciting work was. And I kind of, since I've had my eyes open to indie publishing since starting this channel, it's like it's very much the same movement. It's very much artists doing it for themselves because they don't want to wake up in the morning, look at themselves in the mirror, and know they didn't do it. Which is an exciting movement.
It is. I think that in terms of publishing, it's probably slightly behind music and filmmaking,
Yeah, yeah.
but it seems to be going the similar direction.
Absolutely going the same way. So I have heard also, back to your process, Dr. Chase, that this was 18 years in the making. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I started in 2004, started writing, and it was a little over 18 years before I published the first book from that moment, that summer of 2004. Yeah.
And that was working on all these three, and then another that I've heard rumored that you were working on as well.
That's correct. Yeah, I actually wrote 4 books, and I don't want to give the impression I was working on them year round for 18 years.
Right. Yeah,
It was
I understand. You've got a class load and
summers.
everything as well. So working that long, I feel confident in guessing you're one of those people that the magic happens in the rewriting. You're not one of those, because my wife, when she was doing graduate work, went to the archives for Cormac McCarthy, and she's like, this guy just spits it out.
Yeah,
Like his first notes on a cocktail napkin are pretty much what's in the book.
yeah. That's not me.
So yeah, I mean, that's not a lot of people. So the magic for you is the reworking, the rewriting, the crafting, the honing, that type of journey.
But I think magic is a great word because I really enjoy editing, and I
Hmm.
have enjoyed. So the agent that I worked with, fantastic person. He helped me a lot, and gave me very valuable feedback. And without his feedback, these books wouldn't be as what they are today. And
Sure.
also, the same thing with AP. He gave me extremely valuable feedback that I treasure, because I do believe that he helped me make the stories better. So I also just love, though, the editing process. I do enjoy getting the initial story out there, but
Hmm.
I'm a tweaker. I love to just change a thing here and there, and find a way to make this sentence more impactful. I love going back and thinking, wait, I think I need another chapter for this character, earlier in the story. So I'll go back, and so there have been so many layers of editing and revising that it would be very difficult for me to even explain the whole process over those 18 years.
Yeah, but it's almost like the editing is kind of like a different part of the brain, I would guess, right? It would much more disciplined, meticulous puzzle piecing the pieces together. I mean, I've heard you say that you had a whole different beginning that from where you started on book one.
Yeah, well, the book one initially started with what is now chapter 3.
Yeah, that's what. Yes.
Kind of threw the reader into in kind of a little bit of an in medias race kind of thing, and then I realized, you know what? I think I need some backstory, and then I think I need a prologue, and then you know what? I also probably should have one of the last chapters I wrote in that book is actually chapter 2, which is where I introduce Sequara, who is a major character.
Yeah.
I I realized, well, you know what? I need to introduce her sooner. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It works so well, again, in that classic fantasy way, that you start with these disparate threads that are going to become a beautiful tapestry. And I love that journey, that structure, that journey to your structure. It took me back to some classical pieces that I truly love. And another thing I absolutely, and this is my soft spot. So I'm going to be on this for a while.
Okay.
And why I tell you, the book was so meaningful to me and really moved me because my soft spot, particularly as a reader, is when one of the themes interwoven through the story is the importance of story to all
Ah,
of us
yeah.
as a people, as a species, to define our very world that we live within, right?
Yes.
And this, I wrote, and this isn't even all, Dr. Chase, but I wrote some examples that just struck me to the point where there's a couple times I literally had to put the book aside to think and meditate a little bit on the importance of story to our lives that was so amazingly portrayed in the book. Um, so the first one is and again, this goes straight back to classical fantasy. And before I get into that classical fantasy, I do want to commend you on one other thing. How was it to build your prose style? Because I've said this in a couple updates I've done while reading the book. You do such a great job of walking a knife's edge between the classical formal feel to where I feel like I'm reading something of weight and importance and something that's survived, and at the same time, it has the freedom and rhythms of movement to not get in the way as far as the prose goes and just not slow down the turning of the pages as you become enwrapped in the story. Talk to me about that knife's edge that I know you had to angst over while you were building this, because it's evident.
Yes. I think some of that probably comes from the fact that, and this goes back to me aspiring to do what Tolkien did and deciding, well, I need to learn a bunch of archaic languages and that sort of thing. So I became a medievalist, and I do believe that my being steeped in medieval literature has a most definite influence on my prose. That's a big part of it, and so that's something I share in common with many of the older fantasy writers like William Morris and J.R.R. Tolkien. But I also am a big fan of Ursula Le Guin, who I think just has the most gorgeous prose. And furthermore, I'm a fan of an essay that she wrote called From Elfland to Poughkeepsie. I don't know if you've read it or not.
No, I'll have to look that up.
Oh, yeah.
I'm,
Okay. Yeah.
I'm
I
gonna write it
highly
down.
recommend it. It's very short, but it's From Elfland to Poughkeepsie. And I've talked about it on YouTube a few times. But essentially, her contention in the essay is that the prose is not some separate element from the story. The prose is the story.
Yes.
It is the cake, right? It is
Yes.
the
Yes.
world, everything, the immersion depends on the prose.
Yes.
And her contention is that for fantasy, part of the author's job is to convey, if it's another world, we're not talking about urban fantasy or some portal fantasy or whatever, but if you're creating a different world, especially if that different world is supposed to have an older feel to it, an older tone to it, then part of the job of the writer is to differentiate the language of that place. And you don't want to overdo that. You don't want to have too many thous and where it feels stilted and difficult for a reader. But you don't want to have your characters sounding like they're in New Jersey either.
Sure.
So you want your reader to feel immersed in a different world, and you can achieve that through the prose. So I think that my intention, at least, was to try to strike that balance that Le Guin was talking about, where you do want it to be accessible, you want it to be readable, but at the same time, you want to be telling your reader, this is not our world. This is a different place. This is an older place. So hopefully that worked. And
It absolutely did for me. I can only speak for myself, but in talking to others as well, I think it absolutely worked. And I can tell that part of your editing process over these many years was striking that balance, because it just rings so true. I really want you to understand, for me at least, the work was so self-evident when I read that book.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely did work hard on it. So, and as far as the books 2 and 3, a lot of folks who have read those have indicated that they feel that each one gets better than the last.
Yeah, I've
So
heard that.
I'm pretty excited for you to, if you decide to keep going in the series. To
Oh
hear.
no, that's decided. There's absolutely not a doubt, and I probably will want to speak with you again, maybe after I've read 2 and 3.
Oh,
We can do like a whole overview.
I'd be
But
delighted to.
let me get back to again my favorite thematic moments of the book where you mine the importance of story.
Okay.
And first of all, and again, this goes back to the classical Tolkien feel of the world building through lore, both stories and song. I got such a vivid picture of a place that has a history and weight because there was art from this place that had persevered the turning of time and was very present in these characters' lives, and that makes it so real. It makes it so tangible if they have their own art that is a part of their lives. So when you built that world through some story from the past or a song, a love song, it was thrilling to me to see that, and I don't see that done as often in modern fantasy as I would like to.
Yeah, I agree. You don't see that as much these days. I do feel like, and this is not a complaint, it's an observation. A lot of modern fantasy is stripped down. And I think that may have something to do with the influence of screens on storytelling. It may have something to do with the shorter attention span that people seem to have these days. But for whatever reason, I do think,
Broader audience, fill in the blank, I'm sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there's probably a host of reasons, and it might be more complex than just one of them. But I do think that predominantly, and this is not, there are, I'm sure, exceptions. Modern fantasy tends to be more stripped down in many ways, but I am a fan. I was certainly tempted to do even more, but I realized that I would be testing the patience of my audience or my readers.
Not this audience, because I loved it. But I
Okay.
mean, I think I came from the same background that when you were smitten by what you were smitten with. I think we're near the same age. I think I probably edge you out by a good chunk, but I think our past journey is the same. So for me, it was just such an amazing callback to those journeys I took as a young person in that respect.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm 51, so we're probably similar age. Yeah.
So, close. I beat you out though, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, no,
um,
but the storytelling is very important to me because I am also, in addition to, as you, I think, very observed very well, the intention is to give a sense of layers to this world,
yes,
like with
yes.
Tolkien, the sense that this is a lived-in world with history, with mythology. So I worked all that stuff out, and I tried to incorporate it into the story to where it assisted the story and where it complemented the story in terms of not just the plot but also the themes, because let's, for example, exile is an important theme, and a lot of the stories that are within the story touch on exile. So
Hmm.
there is a bard in the story, for example, who tells the story of Alsheen, who was abducted from her home and becomes an exile. It's a different facet of this theme that I'm trying to look at from various perspectives. So I'm trying also to do some foreshadowing with the stories within the story, and I'm trying to tell the reader, look out for this. This is important,
Right,
right?
right. And the character moments of how that art impacts the characters living through it for themselves and how it's cathartic for them in that moment. So it becomes like that layered meta moment for the characters, which I was wonderful. And you just interwove those stories in a just brilliant way. My next one I want to talk about here is the way you, and I cannot tell you how right you were to go back and restart this book, because
Hmm.
the beginning inciting incident, and I'm going to be vague, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
It's quite brutal,
Yeah.
but it is fodder and it is fuel for a story to be used
Yeah.
to move this entire people and narrative forward. And I thought that was such a brilliant use of story as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that incident existed, but it was only referred to in retrospect, and I felt that it was important to actually portray it, as brutal as it is. I felt that it was important to
And I
portray.
love that was part of that balance. As brutal was it as it was,
Yeah.
to kick off with that, I was like, okay, this is not Tolkien. This may
No.
sound like Tolkien for here and there, the rhythms and the gravitas, but we're going there. This is brutal. This is straight up brutal. This is going to have a nice social mirror that I love to reflect the world that I live in and process it through my art.
Yeah.
And I true that use of story as the inciting incident to be twisted and used to push the whole narrative. Again, wonderful use of story. The next one that really struck me, and I think I know where you're coming from on this. Our interpersonal story that we create for ourselves
Sure.
that has to be subverted. In this case, by Raven, he has his father, just like my father did, and I've heard you speak about your father and grandfather and what they used to do.
Yeah.
My father blocked out the sun. He
Yeah.
was the hero that I grew up looking up to.
Right.
And I had a narrative in my head of what I would be and how I would fill his shoes and follow his footsteps, from the time I was, very, very small. And to have to overcome that personal narrative, that personal story,
Yeah.
to be able to do what the moment requires, or to start that hero's journey, to subvert that very story and strike out for your own path, find your own life's meaning. And what I've heard you speak about, that was so present for me, and such an amazing use of story in the narrative that I appreciated as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I think you observed that very well. And Day Raven is in the fortunate or unfortunate position of having a heroic father, someone who has achieved a level of success that most people will never get close to, in a certain realm.
Right.
And so that's the thing. And I think
But I
what,
think that's universal, right? Don't we all see our father that way? I mean, I know I did.
oh, for sure. My father is, so I'm 5'10", and my father is 6'2". And he was a brilliant athlete. He was very athletic, and I was fairly athletic myself. But I grew up playing basketball with him. I grew up playing baseball with him. I grew up playing ping pong with him. And in all of these sports and more, I never stood a chance. It was just every day. Actually, all through college, I played ping pong with my father every day, and I lost every day. He was a college ping pong champion, by the
Oh
way.
my God. Why'd you? Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
love to even try.
Yeah, but, it was a thing for me, and then years and years later at a family reunion, I finally beat him, and he was, in his 60s, probably at
Yeah.
that point, so it was just kind of like this, and you would think I would feel awesome in that moment, but I actually felt kinda guilty.
Oh, it's
So,
no, it's a melancholy moment for sure. I know exactly what you speak
yeah,
of.
yeah.
Um, Now, and your father was a minister, a pastor?
Correct, yes, yes.
And now to see him, I can only guess, because one of the things I love about your channel, Dr. Chase, is the resonant, and I've compared you to Don Pardo off of Saturday Night Live. The way of Edan, welcome to my channel. And I can only see you looking up at your father on the pulpit, and marveling at his use of voice and narrative to bring his message across, and growing up that way, and then setting out on your own academic path.
Yeah.
So I saw, and maybe this was just me, but I saw a good deal of you in this journey.
Oh, I absolutely think you write what you know, and I'm always finding glimpses of myself in the characters, and almost all the characters, not
Sure.
all, but almost all the characters. I can see little pieces, facets of myself. So most certainly, yes, I would say that is a reflection of, in some way or other, my own life experience. Yeah.
Let me move on to the next one. That was that one. Okay. Now, magic system, the very magic system in this
Yeah.
is evoked by what you lovingly call the Song of Origin.
Yes.
So to bring about a restructuring of reality or magic in this is to tell an origin story, is to understand empathically something else to where you can move it in a certain way. And that again for me just struck a chord. You must understand something to know its story and tell a story that you want to change it with. So
Right.
the very magic system itself, and I've heard people say, oh, it's a soft magic system, it's not, it's just there. And it's like, no, 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 there's way more going on here. There's
Uh,
way more going on here than that. I would absolutely call this a hard magic system. You have to understand the story of a thing.
yeah. I think it's, well, I do think as you read the second and the third book, you'll learn more. And even the standalone sequel probably will show a few things that people haven't seen yet about the magic and the way it works. And I don't mind how people refer to it. I do think that there is definitely an underlying, not just mechanics of it, but a philosophy behind it.
Yes.
And I think there are two important things in terms of how it emerged. One is the Finnish Kalevala, which is
Hmm.
an epic. It's basically sewn together in the 19th century of much older tales, but and they call it the Kalevala. It's the national epic of Finland. In the Kalevala, magic happens through song, and you have various figures in there who sing, and by their through their singing manipulate the world around them. So that's one thing you can see, obviously, I think, in what I'm doing. The other thing that I even probably in a deeper way that is lying beneath this magic is, I think, a very kind of Buddhist philosophy. Uh,
Hmm.
the idea that all of life is connected, and
Hmm.
that even as I think of myself as a separate entity with an ego and all of that, there is a deeper underlying reality in which I'm really part of the fabric of everything, and the energy that inhabits all things inhabits me, and that I, even though I think of myself as different, I'm really actually part of everything, and I always have been.
Mm.
So that's kind of that. In using the songs of origin, one needs to be in that space, in the realm of origins, as I put it in the storytelling, rather than the realm of forms. So rather than being in the ego space, the realm of forms where I am separate, you at least some level need to be in the realm of origins where you realize your connection to everything.
And in that connection, in that identityless moment, is the beauty of singularity. I mean, we are made up of what made up dead stars, and through that is magic. Through that is not just sameness, but magic, and it's transcendent, really. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And that, and you used the right word there. There is a sense of transcendence about the magic as well. That you must transcend yourself in order to partake of that connection
Yes.
with everything else. And you are the thing that you are, in fact, manipulating. But on some other level as well, there's a danger in that, right? So if someone using this magic
You can't come
goes
back.
too far, you can't come back.
Yeah.
You
And
need to
that's
protect
that
the
that
body. Yeah.
that beautiful axiom of all magic comes with a cost, and there
Yes.
is that edge you could slide off of.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I truly love the moment of story in the very magic system as well. Now, that I also truly love now, and I just think again, this is one of those wonderful social mirror moments that I get from this type of genre that allows me to digest situations in my own world or injustices in my own world or problems in my own world. If I can remove myself, I'm able to look at it maybe in a new light.
That's right.
The history as story and an identity that can be used and twisted and forgotten.
Mm,
And not until Dayraven meets, and again, very vague, meets the dwarves. I'm not even going to throw names out there, but
yeah.
they're lorist and they truly understand and know where we came from. So we
Right.
can start to understand histories written by the winners. This may not be the true story, even though it is a story. and it can be twisted and used down to our very soul and core of us being seeing ourselves as in our circle and other, or when maybe that's not the case. And that just is struck me as such an amazing truth that you interwove through the book and use of narrative.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, it is a truth that I have experienced in my life. I've had the honor and the privilege to live in various places, and I lived in Germany when I was a kid.
Mm.
I lived in Nepal for a good amount of time and returned there all the time. And one of the gifts of living in a place like Nepal is that you gain a perspective about yourself when you steep yourself enough in that culture, and especially if you learn the language.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
You gain a lens through which to see where you've come from in a new way. And so you're outside of your old perspective in that moment, and it is so enlightening to realize how you're seen by others if you can achieve that, if you can experience that. And it can change the way you see yourself. It can
Did
change your
did
narrative about yourself as well.
right, did you find yourself being the other, like being removed from the norm, or just being in that situation that made you reevaluate the space you fill and who you are, that kind of thing?
Most definitely, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was challenging and ultimately one of the most enriching experiences of my life, to have that experience and emerge from it. I feel with a greater sense of self. So yeah, I feel very grateful for having had that experience. And yes, so there are characters in the story who are booted out into the world, and they realize that their narrative is quite incomplete. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or manipulated or just misremembered.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, fascinating that you could bring that moment, that epiphany in your life to the work. And I absolutely appreciate it and saw it. So I do thank you for that. I think it's important.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah.
Now, okay, I think I can say, and not make it a spoiler, that there is a holy war brewing.
Yes, that's on the back cover.
That's on the back, right? So, and I read the ebook, so I want to make sure. So, but yeah, there's a holy war brewing, and the use of story again, um, by this religious order. And you even went so far as to go deep into it. And I can't remember exactly what you called it, but they are actively in a conclave constructing their story of their religion that they will disseminate and put out.
Sure.
And it brought back to me, Vatican II, and it just brought back to me again that mirror that I was able to look at my own world. So again, the use of story through ideology and what we will disseminate and what we will stand by and what we will protect that we don't want to get out because what will that cause? The power of that, all the way down to the inner workings of this religious order, I thought was wonderful that you included that in.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a fictional religion, obviously, but it mirrors, I hope, the real world experience of religions when they become powerful institutions, and you can find a narrative that these entities, these institutions, wish to impress upon the world. And sometimes they do so through violence. That is a fact of our history. We have many tragic moments of these attempts to impose and to dominate, using religion as a tool in that process. At the same time, though, when any institution gets large enough, what you'll find is a lot of within the institution differences. And you will
Mhm.
find that there is some fragmentation, and there is a constant tension between holding everything together and these disparate elements that are within it that might have different, not just interpretations, but intentions.
Yes.
So that is something I've tried to get across as well.
And that absolutely in character motivations, the wheels within this organization of change and not change, and that's absolutely well portrayed. Um, the last one I want to talk that truly struck me is towards the end,
Uh-huh.
and there is a fervor, jingoistic fervor has been amped up, and we are marching with the drums, and the narrative that is used as propaganda to incite this army, and you do such a great job of spending enough time around the campfire with the individuals, or some individuals that make up that army, not even necessarily our main players, but just enough to bring in that we understand everyone marching in that army is a story, is an individual that makes up this broader phalanx, you know, marching onward with the drums, being propelled by this story of and their king rearing on the white horse on the hill. And it's like all the symbolism is there. And the story used to bring about this fervor to violence, I thought was truly spoke to me in that way, using story in that way.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the evolution of human beings, and you see that we've gone from a smaller unit of, let's say, a tribe or a clan to a tribe to a kingdom to, and you see the entities to which we feel we owe our loyalty getting larger and larger as our history goes on. For the most part, there's a kind of progression going on there. I think it's fair to say,
Mm-hmm.
not even necessarily, not steady, but there's a more or less a progression there. And what I'm interested in is the othering that goes on during all of that, and how anyone outside that circle, whether it be the clan or the tribe or the kingdom or what have you, anyone outside that circle is usually not trusted,
Straight
and
up less than.
is
Straight up.
often basically dismissed or even uh, met with much hostility.
Yes.
And even you could say that in many times and places, it's been a virtue to commit violence against anyone outside of the in group. But what's interesting to me is how this in group keeps getting bigger and bigger, right? And
Mm-hmm.
are we going to
Mm-hmm.
reach a point? I actually feel myself, and this is a private belief, but I feel that our survival as a species probably depends on whether or not we're able to transcend all of the in groups and finally see all of not just humanity, but all of life on this planet as our in group. So I'm very interested in how we see others outside of our groups as foreign, as different, as enemy, as something to be fought against and resisted. And I'm also very interested in moments when people, and this happens, I've seen it happen, and it happened for me, when people see something that you assume to be so different from yourself, and then suddenly you have this epiphany, you have this revelation, you see yourself in that other, and you realize,
Yes.
oh, I am this person. I
Yes.
am connected to these people. They are not what I thought, and I am not what I thought, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And what's fascinating to me is how groups, including religions, have been sources of comfort and connection and love and good, but they've also been a source of violence and hatred and persecution. So how is that? How are we humans? We're so full of conflict. We
Yes.
are capable of making these institutions that can foster so much that is good, but at the same time, so much that is evil and bad and destructive. So I'm fascinated by that, and I'm fascinated by how our identification with the group can be a positive, but it also can be a negative, and how we're asked sometimes out of loyalty to one group to uh, commit atrocities, to turn off our empathy for that other, that entity outside the in group. So I'm fascinated by this dynamic, and obviously it plays a big role in the story.
It does, and it's so important to me to examine it. um, it's a question for me of distance and perspective. We get further away from something, like, oh my God, how could an example of genocide happen? How could that have come to pass? And it comes to pass from the power of story, from the power of narrative. Within this in group, we tell a story that if you say it long enough and loud enough, starts to become believed. And those outside this group are less than to the point where, we have, the violence springs forth. And it's all a question. And then when we get further away from that and we have some distance and perspective, it's a question of narrative and story that we use to define ourselves and our world around us.
Yep.
And what an amazing possibility for you to see that if we could rewrite that narrative to where we not only see humanity, but the globe, the nature itself as one, what that would mean, what that would be. Quite Eastern, but I think it would be amazing, fascinating, wonderful if that could be rewritten in that way. And this discussion tees up, and I actually wrote a quote. This struck me so much I had to write this out, Dr. Chase, and I'm sure they're your words, so I'm just going to say them back to you because I have no other way to express what this moment meant to me.
Uh-huh.
Uh, this mirage was a jar, and they were moths beating against its sides and fluttering in senseless circles, all the while ignorant of the endless expanse stretching outside.
Mm.
That, my friend, is beautiful.
Uh, yeah, that is the epiphany that the character in that moment is having, about the sea of humanity around him. And
Enwrapped in this story.
exactly, they are all following this narrative, as you say, the power of this story. They are being called to follow it, and they are willingly following it. And in that process, they are very much like moths battering themselves against the side of the jar, not comprehending that there's an entire world out there.
More than a world,
Yeah.
more than just one world. It's the transcend. It's it truly struck me. It truly spoke to me, and I really hope when you wrote that line that you patted yourself on the back because,
Oh,
that's going to live with me. That's not going to go away. I found that to be just an innate moment of truth that I found in the book.
uh-huh. Well, I'm so grateful that you found that, and I thank you for telling me that too. Yeah.
And I want to bring up a little dramatic device you use to be able to do that.
Mhm.
And that's and again, I'm going to try and walk a very fine line to not give anything away.
Mhm.
But there's a dramatic device that Day Raven is dealing with in his own mind that he's having to overcome on this journey of his, that at times can allow him to be removed and actually have like an omniscient perspective and version of what's going on around him.
Right.
And that brings an omniscient narration into a very grounded character moment. And I, did you purposefully work that in so you could have that in your back pocket? Or was that just, oh, this happened, and since that happened, I can do this? Was
Mhm.
it a happenstance from the story, or did you plan that out to be able to pull that out, out of your back pocket?
I am a planner. I'm a architect, as some people put it. So I definitely did. That's a very, and you will see, by the way, in books 2 and 3, that what you're speaking about becomes more and more important, more and more central. It dominates the third book in many ways. So yeah, it's very much planned from beginning to end, and I hope that even after reading the third book, that some readers will feel that it changes what they read in the first book. Uh,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, yeah. I hope so, in some ways. But yes, this is the thing that this central event, and the catalyst happens early in the book, in the way of Edan, what the catalyst for what you're speaking about. And it was the central event, in many ways, around which everything else, certainly for the protagonist, um, but not just the protagonist, as it turns out, as things sort of converge, it becomes the most important event in many ways, the event that seems to change everything, because without that event having happened, a lot of other things would never have happened.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I I recognize it as when it first happened and as it's going on, I recognize it as a recognizable, again, trope. I don't think that's a bad word. Very much the same type of a fractured persona Randall Thor is dealing with, and I could point to other examples in the genre. Uh, but the way you use it, not just for internal struggle, but an omniscient view of the world, and uh, moments such as this, I thought subverted the trope, and I thought got to a deeper philosophical, spiritual meaning than I had necessarily found in some of these other books, which really spoke to me.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was trying most definitely for that, and it is based on a real life thing, I guess, a phenomenon that happens in many religious traditions, or even through meditation. Um, Something that, with I grew up within the Christian tradition, and I used to spend a lot of time at one point in my life praying and meditating, and I had an experience when I was a 16-year-old boy, where I suddenly, in the midst of praying, found myself suddenly outside of myself. It was as if I left.
Really?
Yeah, it was crazy. I didn't know this was a thing. Even it was a bit frightening, but it was blissful at the same time. And you leave your body behind. You have this sense of oneness with the universe, as if you're looking down on everything and you're part of everything. It's really difficult to describe, but many people have described it, and it's something that happens. Like I said,
Almost like a transcendental meditation moment.
absolutely, I would
Yeah,
say that it's the identical experience. I did it within the Christian tradition, and I think just about every religious tradition has people within it, particularly the mystics of every religion, have had experiences like this. So I'm basing this experience, that I'm
on your
writing.
own. Again, you're bringing your
Yeah,
right what you know. You're bringing your experience
yeah,
to it.
yeah.
Maybe that's why I'm seeing such a truth to it. That fascinates me, Dr. Chase, and this is a question I kind of had. Was there ever a moment when you were a young boy that you felt the drive to follow your father, your grandfather
Oh, sure.
into the family business, especially after having a moment, an epiphany such as this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I for a few years believed that I would become a pastor as well. And then somewhere about halfway through college, I realized that that was not going to be my path.
Really? So you were actually all the way up into college.
Yep. All the way into about halfway through college. I was probably around 20 when I admitted to myself, I don't think I can do this.
So was it theology you initially started studying when you started?
I did. Well, I mean, as an undergraduate, I did study philosophy of religion, and I read a lot on my own. I read a lot of theology on my own. I read the Bible many, many times, and read as much as I could about it. I wanted to learn about it, and the more I learned, weirdly, the more I realized, that it wasn't going to be my path.
Yeah.
And so that was. Yeah, I'm grateful for every step of that journey, and I'm glad that it worked out the way it did. I still have a great deal of affection for the traditions that I grew up in, and I feel like they're very much a part of who I am today in ways I probably don't even understand. But
Oh, I bet not. Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think we fully can, what makes us up that our own personal story that makes us up that way. Yeah.
yep, yep. So, but yeah, it's somewhere around the, I guess halfway through college, I figured, no, I'm just going to study medieval literature and see what comes of that.
I mean, was that a callback to Tolkien when you decided to make that 180 and go into
Maybe.
medieval literature?
Yeah, I think that was always with me, the desire to study languages, and I always wanted to write. a piece of advice that I got in eighth grade when my school in rural Vermont, at that point I was back in Vermont where I was born. Uh, there was a day when they asked every student, "What do you want to be? What career are you interested in?" We were in eighth grade. I don't know why. It seems kind of early to me, but they basically paired us up for a day with someone in that profession. So if you said, "I want to be a police officer," you'd get to spend the day with the at the police station or whatever. I said, "I want to be a writer," and
Really?
they had to find a writer for me in rural Vermont, which they did. A fellow, nice chap named David Budbill. He's passed away, but I knew him as a playwright. But actually, he wrote novels and poetry as well. And but his piece of advice I will never forget, and he was very kind in giving it to me. I think was, "Hey, it's wonderful you want to be a writer. It's fantastic. I encourage you to pursue this dream, but you're going to need a day job." So that was the piece of advice I got. So the thing I always sort of wasn't sure about, I thought for a few years my day job was going to be doing what my father and grandfather and great grandfather did, which is to be a pastor. And there came a point when I realized, no, that's not my day job. So I had to figure out another day job, and I probably was, leaning back on Professor Tolkien there in the path that I ultimately followed in going to grad school and studying Old English and Old Norse and medieval literature on a more formal level. So yeah, I mean, but I'm happy with the day job I got, and I'm happy that I've thrown my hat in the ring in terms of getting a story out there. So yeah.
You know what? I am very happy that you decided on the path you decided on as well. It was a very meaningful journey to me. Um, I just think overall that to tell a story that I walked away with realizing that all the way from the magic system on being empathetic to understand our universe around us, and with the epiphany of we are more alike than different,
Yeah.
and these flashpoints, these moments of violence that may overcome our history is moments of narrative being twisted and used almost as a magic system of their own
Sure.
for ill.
Yeah.
I found it an enormously important work and a fascinating work, and I'm just so happy you have it out there. And I just cannot recommend everyone enough to go get a copy of this trilogy and read it, because I think it not only is it an amazing epic hero's journey, wonderful epic fantasy, but there is a spiritual truth at its core that I think speaks to us in this time when we are so polarized in this country and around the world,
Yeah.
that is just needed, deeply needed, and deeply important.
Yeah. Well, thank you, John. You've been very kind, and I've really enjoyed the process of getting the story out there. And if it speaks to some people in that way, in the way I was hoping, then I'm very, very grateful. So this has been a real pleasure getting to talk with you and hear some of your thoughts and reactions, which I have to say, I was hoping that people would it would resonate in some way.
Well, I got to tell you, I say absolutely nothing that I'm completely earnest. I feel everything I say. So the journey and the time you gave me tonight, it would, believe me, was all my pleasure. Now I know you have a fourth book in this universe. Are there future plans for something after this in the same universe and something different, or is something hatching? Is something happening? Or
Oh, I very much want to continue writing, and my goal is to be able to. And let's see how it goes. I do have a complete draft of the sequel. It's a standalone called While Darkness Gathers.
ooh.
And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's cryptic.
So yeah, we'll that I hope to. I should be able to put out in 2024. And if I have my druthers, then I will be able to write a book a year or so. That's my goal. Let's see if I can make that happen. And I do have a full time. I do have that day job that.
Yeah, that takes some time.
Yeah. So, and I also have a YouTube channel, which takes time and other things. So we'll see. My goal though is to definitely write more stories. And at the moment, I feel most like writing within this world that I've created already. And so I anticipate there will be, beyond even the standalone sequel, some more stories there. But I could also see myself eventually saying, okay, time to move on, start something
Something
new.
new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Well, I will tell you, I hope I can call you my friend, my new friend.
Oh, absolutely.
If you write these stories, my word, I will be there to read them.
Oh, well, thank you, John. I appreciate it. And I most definitely, this has been a wonderful conversation. If we can't be friends after a conversation like this, then when can we be?
Thank you so much, Dr. Chase, for joining me on Talking Story. It was an absolute pleasure, and I cannot wait to get into book 2.
Thank you so much. And thank you to your viewers as well. And it's been a real privilege.
And we will put right down here. There'll be a link to purchase the book, and there'll be, if anyone is subscribed to me and not subscribed to Dr. Fantasy. First of all, what's wrong with you? I mean, I can't wrap my head around a world that works in. But we will put your channel link right underneath here as well. So
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
thank you, Dr. Chase.
All right.
Bye.